It's a real pleasure to be with you today and to talk on one of my favorite subjects, how entrepreneurs are changing the world. This first slide is taken from a book published last year about how entrepreneurs are revolutionizing business in the Middle East. It lists a number of very, very successful entrepreneurs from this region. I've been living in the Middle East now for 5 years and have observed some of the changes going on. This area is evolving and becoming more business-oriented, more entrepreneurial, literally every year. As was mentioned, I founded a number of high technology companies in the first part of my career in the United States. One of the things that I noticed was that each company got progressively easier to do. The first one was a pretty heavy lift. It took quite a while for us to, I was trained as a scientist. My PhD is in nuclear physics. I never had a business course. But I did have an invention and a desire to commercialize that invention, and that's what gave rise to the first company. And I was very fortunate that my first boss, after I left graduate school, I went to Brookhaven National Lab, one of our great nuclear research labs, and I had the great privilege to go to work for a gentleman at Brookhaven, one of the senior scientists at Brookhaven, by the name of Harry Polewski. You'll see him a couple of slides later. But Harry was the great influence on my career, and he was the one who urged me to seek my fortunes not in scientific research, but rather as an entrepreneur. So, how do you go about starting a company? Well, most companies begin with ideas. And ideas are better if they're inspired by a need in the marketplace. It's much harder if the idea is a technology looking for an application. I've actually taught courses in technology commercialization. It is very hard to do. Much better to find a need in the marketplace and then find the appropriate technology to fill that need. It's best to market test your ideas before proceeding, and successful entrepreneurs are always looking for ideas, and the fact is that business ideas are always all around us. Almost any time you see a problem, solving that problem can involve a profitable business. So one of the things that we teach in our entrepreneurship programs is to teach people to recognize problems as opportunities. As I mentioned, one also needs a mentor. A mentor is someone who you can trust, someone you can go to for advice when the going gets rough. And the function of the mentor is to sort of get you through those rough spots. My mentor during my career was my first boss, Harry Polewski. Harry lived 70 years on this planet from 1920 to 1990. Was one of the smartest and wisest people that I ever met. And he was the one who urged me to a career as an entrepreneur. Now, Harry was inspired in this because in 1960, his younger brother, Max Polewski, 5 years younger than Harry, had borrowed $80,000 from Harry and started a company called Scientific Data Systems. Scientific Data Systems was the first company to market a computer designed from the ground up for so-called online applications. It was also one of the very first transistorized computers to be built. That company, while I was working for Harry, was sold to the Xerox Corporation for $1,969,000. And Max pocketed $250 million as his personal share of that transaction. He then became a founding investor and board member in a company you've already heard about called Intel, and sat on the board of Intel for 30 years, from 1969 to 1999, helping to guide that company to global dominance in the microprocessor business. Now, Max's timing was always absolutely superb. He even picked the best year to die. Now, how many billions Max was worth, I don't know. I have a huge coffee table-sized book at home titled The Homes of Max Palevsky. Max was certainly worth many billions of dollars. And he died in February of 2010. The only year in my lifetime when the United States federal estate tax rate was 0. So, a man with absolutely superb timing, and he became the role model. Harry told me so many stories about how Max built his career as an entrepreneur, and that became the inspiration for my own career. You also need a market. Now, it's best if that's a small market. Now, that seems counterintuitive, but what you want is a small market with high growth potential. If you start in a large market, there's already entrenched competition in that market. It's very hard for entrepreneurial companies to catch up with that competition. It's certainly hard to become a market leader in such a market. Almost all the great entrepreneurial stories that you hear are companies that started in small markets and then built the market. They grew their markets. That's certainly true of Intel. There was no microprocessor market before Intel created it. And it's true of almost all successful entrepreneurial businesses. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, do I have what it takes to make the market? If you can answer that question affirmatively, you have a great market opportunity. Then you need a selling message. The selling message needs to appeal to a basic buying motive. It needs to be easily communicated. It needs to reassure that the risk of buying from you is low. And if you can find a way to represent that selling message visually with a picture or a graphic, that's very powerful and very memorable. Why is that? It's because the largest single piece of cerebral cortex in the human brain is devoted to visual perception and visual memory. So let me give you an example of a visual selling message. And this one comes from the Global Moot Court competition of the year 2000. 14 years ago. This was the very first Global Moot Court competition that I went to, and it's the big MBA business plan competition that operates on a global basis. And the team that won back in 2000 was from Australia. And they had a machine which made specialty coffees like espressos, lattes, cappuccinos, mochas, out of powdered ingredients. And their target market was fast food restaurants. And I'm convinced that the following slide is what won the competition for them. This is an example of a visual selling message. They said, Mr. Restaurant owner, you can make as much by selling one of our cups of coffee as you make on selling 3 hamburgers. Equal profit. Very powerful selling message. Now, when I did my second company, we made a robot that was designed to replace human telephone operators in telephone inquiry and data entry type situations. And we called our robot the Infobot, for information robot. You'd call it and get information. And our selling message, which was aimed at chief financial officers of the purchasing companies, was Infobot works for 25 cents an hour. 25 cents is, a tiny salary by U.S. standards. Today, the minimum U.S. wage is $7.25 an hour. And this is how we represented that to customers. We would make a sales call. We would pitch that we could, if you had a room full of operators, you could replace them with a machine that would work for 25 cents an hour. And we would leave this little clear plastic embedment with the customer, had a bright, shiny U.S. quarter embedded in clear plastic, and it said the first hour is on us. So that was an example of a visual selling message. Those kinds of selling messages are very powerful because they're very memorable. You also need a team. Entrepreneurship, our image is of kind of the lone entrepreneur who by himself builds a business. That is an enormous myth. Great entrepreneurial businesses are always built by teams of people. Steve Jobs had Steve Wozniak. Bill Gates had Paul Allen and Steve Ballmer. Intel was a real example of a company with a starting, very powerful team. What you're looking for in an entrepreneurial team is people with complementary skills, total dedication, mission orientation, a long-term focus, and people who are motivated by changing the world, not by making money. You'll make the money after you change the world. Then you also need leadership. Great execution requires great leadership. Great leaders inspire people rather than command them. There's a technique that I learned fairly early in my management career, and that is to make my ideas their ideas. The fact is that people will run much harder if they're running not with what you've told them to do, but rather with something that they think is their own idea. So the way you do this is very simple. You engage the person in a conversation about a challenge or a problem that the business has. And you ask them, if you were assigned this problem, how would you approach it? And they'll come back with some sort of answer. If that's not what you want, you say, well, yeah, but what about this, this, and this? And, they'll try a second approach, maybe a third approach. Eventually, they'll come back with exactly the idea or the approach that you want them to take. You say, Fred, that's a great idea. Why don't you go do that? And they go away thinking it's their idea. Very simple, but very effective.